See my screen that has the presentation on it? Perfect.
Yep.
Okay. Okay, so yeah, I was originally approached by the Idaho group there, and we honestly have had an ongoing statewide parcel framework layer for going on 2 decades. Yeah, well over 2 decades now. So, the situations are not completely relatable, but I was asked to touch on some uses, some common uses of the parcels. And so some of you will recognize this, especially if you used to work for Montana or have done work in this state. So yeah. Um, so just kind of a quick overview of where I'm going to go. And what I did tell Megan is, I could not touch on the common uses of the parcels without actually kind of going into some of the history and some of the back end stuff of how and why we maintain what we do. Um, and so I'll first kind of go through some of the history and background of how this came about in the uh, late 90s is kind of where it kind of all starts. I'll kind of go through some statewide cadastral components, and move kind of into the parcel framework maintenance, um, and we'll kind of move into the common parcel uses, and then we'll wrap up with some questions and discussion. So, and I don't plan to go the entire hour. I probably will depend on how much time I take, but yeah. So I'm hoping you guys have some questions and discussion of this, because we're just another state over, and we're happy to help out where we can. But I can certainly see where there would be questions. So. But myself, I'm the cadastral framework lead here at the Montana State Library. Been in this position for about 5 years now, coming up on 5 years in November, so 4 years and some change. My background, though, I graduated from Montana State University with a earth science GIS focused bachelor's degree, and then I also got my master's while I was working at City Great Falls. I got my master's in geographic technology from Northeastern University. So, and that's out of Boston too, for those that aren't familiar. And I've served on the board 2 different times, and actually I just got elected to so this is MAGUP is the Montana, essentially the Montana GIS Professionals Group. But yeah, so I'll be serving on the board as a conference liaison, and so essentially help planning the annual conference that MAGUP puts on each year. So next year it's going to be in Helena, so if anyone is interested, you're certainly welcome. And I've been a member of that association for 13 years, and I enjoy running, hiking, and skiing, and kayaking, and recently a dad of 2 kids now. So oldest is going to be 3 this year, and the youngest just turned 6 months. So got a lot on my plate at home as well. So. Okay, so, and like I mentioned in the intro, the state's involvement kind of goes back to the mid to late 90s. A lot of us here, I think there's one person here that actually probably could completely talk to all of this, but obviously I was not even in college yet when, in these late 90s. So, but just with the general research that we've done, most of this effort began in the mid to late 90s. It was kind of like this aggressive push to create a statewide cadastral program, which is the Montana Cadastral. Many of you are probably familiar with it, but kind of what went into this initially. So they essentially started from ground zero. And this is right around when GIS was making its big push, and so a lot of this information wasn't even available in geometry or parcel form. It's essentially these parcels were created out of legal descriptions, digitization of historic subdivision plats, you know, deed deeds, the GCDB, now known as the CAD and SDI, was used as the framework to essentially build, from the ground up. And we still kind of use the GCDB as the framework that helps us do adjustments. So a lot of my job as the cadastral framework lead is to do these parcel adjustments, or the CAD and SDI adjustments, which then leads into the parcel adjustments. So we kind of take that from a statewide perspective, but we're in a completely different ballgame than you all in Idaho, because I realize that most of the counties there maintain their own parcels. So I mean so in Montana is a much bigger state too. So there's some challenges there too. But yeah, this took several years to complete. So we had full coverage of the statewide parcel layer by 2003. There was portions of it, or I would say probably a good majority of it was completed by 2002, but this 03 was when it was fully completed. I think there was some, they were waiting on some states to fully populate, fully be mapped. And this data is continued to be offered at a offered online, open data, on a county basis. So we're still using the old FTP. We do have hopes, hopefully by later this year, of migrating that data to ArcGIS Hub, and that should alleviate a lot of the issues that we have with publication, or the deprecation of FTPs kind of across the country. So and then I can certainly send this link to you all, because I really don't want to get out of this presentation at the moment, but we were featured in the Esri Arc News in 2011. That essentially highlighted the feat of creating a statewide cadastral database, as Montana was one of the first to kind of do it at completely open public face. And yeah, I just mentioned the hub site. So yeah, we're pretty excited about the potential uses of a hub site. We see Idaho's uses in North Dakota's, and we're kind of behind in that department for our neighboring states, but yeah, it's been a long time coming for us, because some of the sites that we use are kind of built on very old code. And so yes, so back in 2005, Montana legislation created the Montana Land Information Act. It's actually called the Montana Geospatial Information Act now. They had a kind of a language update. I think it was last legislation, so 2022. And this provided annual funding to essentially maintain and further develop these MSDI layers, the spatial data infrastructure. And I think the next slide shows kind of what makes up the MSDI. And this also, this funding established an annual grant program, which one of the priorities is collecting PLSS control. And I kind of I did take this slide from another presentation. So a while back, I did kind of go through and see how many projects and how much that equated to in terms of PLSS control collection projects. And I came up with 41, and it was just over $1 million that was essentially awarded or contributed to these projects that make its way into the parcels for parcel adjustments. Um, Essentially creating better accuracy and better um, use for these areas. And we still got a long ways to go in this realm, this department, and that's why we continue to make this a kind of a long going effort, and working with our stakeholders. We continue to work with the private sector, tribal, local, and other state government entities to kind of take on this task. And we essentially accept data wherever we can take it, but this grant program goes a long way of establishing that funding. And this slide doesn't touch on it, but a lot of this funding comes from recordation fees at the clerk and recorder's level. I don't know if Idaho does something like this, but this is what Montana does. So I think it's like $1.50 or something like that for each page. I think it's cadastral related transactions goes towards this MGIA, so the geospatial land information account that essentially funds this program. So I thought I'd just mention that. So. And then, like I mentioned in the previous slide, the MSDI, and I'll quickly go through this just because it's not relevant, but we have 14 different themes that is supported under that database framework, and 10 of them are stewarded here at MSL. And obviously, this is more of the cadastral portion of that. So kind of diving into the maintenance of the parcels. This is kind of just a simple breakdown. Kind of just threw this slide in there this morning. We have 6 GIS analysts or specialists at the Department of Revenue. They maintain pretty much each one of them maintain a handful of counties. I think the most one person maintains is 8. A lot of them are smaller too, so you don't have these large cities that someone doing a very in very short order, a large amount of parcels. We're talking some of these smaller counties that only have uh, 5,000 parcels or sometimes even less. But the bigger cities, so like when you see on the map there, you see Great Falls, Helena, well, Bozeman's not on there, but some of you are probably familiar with Bozeman. Those are fairly large counties. So some of those county databases can get pretty large, and so it's so that's Department of Revenue. They essentially maintain the majority of them. So there's five counties that are maintained by um, essentially the GIS departments that make up that county. So I have them all highlighted there. So Flathead, Missoula, Valley, Butte, Silverbow, and then Yellowstone is over there in Billings. Um, those are some pretty big GIS departments too. Or fairly big, and then they have just this relationship with Department of Revenue that allows them to, because Department of Revenue still plays a large role in these counties, because they obviously still maintain the tax appraisal CAMA database, but those relationships in the GIS department, they maintain primarily the geometry and the parcels, and many of them actually assign geocodes too. So, but usually gets pre-approved by Department of Revenue. So I'm not sure how it all works in Idaho. This is how it works here, and this kind of relates to, you know, how and why we are kind of more successful at at a statewide layer. There's kind of um, less hands in the cookie jar, I should say. So, and I'll quickly go over this. I just put together. This is from another presentation too that it kind of did explain the cadastral updating process, but I'll just quickly go over this because I could probably spend 20 minutes on this easily, because this is part of my job, obviously. But we do it once a month, and it typically is the second, or yeah, between the first and second business day of the month. Um, and so it's usually a, about a 2-day process to kind of to whip through all of this. I can do it one day if it's a long day. A lot of it's just wait time of these scripts. Um, Many of you are probably familiar with scripts that can take long time, especially if you're running them over the network, which we do in this example. Um, but yeah, so this aggregation will, flag topology, validates, repairs any geometry. So there's kind of a lot of back and forth. I mean, have to we certainly do not go through all the topology checks and make sure it's, completely kosher, but it's just kind of more of a reporting tool back to the counties and Department of Revenue. But hey, um, are you aware of this overlap? Some of them do their own reports too. So, but probably the most important part is, repairing any geometry that essentially can't get past the publication part. So, and I've had situations with like that where the process will completely hang up on some sort of parcel geometry error. And then the parcel data is joined. So after, kind of going through the process of, QAQC data conversion, it's joined with CAMA, the statewide CAMA. And one of the things that, and I'm not sure how your state handles it, but one of the challenges with the parcel layer in Montana is how do you map condos? We still struggle with that. Some counties do it by, just either having, stacked parcels or having circles over these condos. It's one standard I don't think we've really yet figured out. Many of the counties, though, you can't even really search on a condo. You can still get to it in the application because it's mainly driven on geocode. So the cadastral application still allows you to kind of get that information out of there, but just not a very easily way. But a lot of times it's just mapped down to the land parcel, and the data is then drawn out from there, just from its relationship and the relates to the actual condo parcel. So, but yeah, going through this process, publication then exports the data to FTP and the hosted web services. It soon will just be ArcGIS Online, which will be consumed within our hub site. So this process will get a lot simpler in the near future. So um, yeah, so as I mentioned, Montana cadastral application. Montana was one of the first, and is probably still one of only a handful of states that have this statewide application, that integrates the parcels with all the other cadastral and MSDI framework data sets in one application for the user. And there was a study done a number of years ago involving this app, and it estimated 60% of the usage came from the private sector, and I think it was like in the 30s or so was government or state and local uses. Um, and from and I might at the end show this just because it's useful to kind of see the relationships and how these parcels are linked, but it ultimately does depend on the parcel layer greatly. And that's what kind of makes this site so cool, is it's directly links these individual camera records, and these camera records include ownership, dwelling, building information, taxing valuation, ag and forest productivities in those non-urban areas. There's a lot of data that goes into it, and you can see, and I'll go into the uses, but you can probably just think of many of these in your head. One that first comes to my mind: real estate. Real estate probably is the number one use in Montana for this application. So, and we recently had a hiccup of the site last week. It was dealing with Archison line, and it's honestly the whole issue was complicated, and I don't understand a lot of it. But we probably took, I don't know, we took a lot of calls and cases on it. And so like when something goes down like this, you quickly realize the importance of it and how many industries it actually truly does touch. So I do have a slide at the end of kind of, you know, off the top of my head, and then through this study we did highlight uh, some industries, and but the list goes on and on and on. But I did list the common uses, or the common industries that use this data. Um, so as I mentioned, and probably the purpose of this presentation too, is, you know, common uses. Is I know you all are trying to go through the process of, you know, justifying or, you know, kind of collaborating on how do we do this? How do we share our data? How do we make this one, you know, central repository for parcels and cadastral data? You know, we're obviously fortunate in the state that that's kind of been a, um, kind of built from the ground up. And I think if we were to do it today in all these different counties where maintaining their own data, I think it would be a ton more difficult. But I'll just kind of go through some of the common parcel uses, that I see, what our study highlighted, and you certain you all can certainly, um, take it for what it is, and but the ones I can think of too, you know, so private right of way, we're mainly thinking about fiber, cable, communication, you know, gas pipelines, transmission power lines, the research that goes into these projects, the acquisition, of easements or land, mostly probably just easements in these cases, um, public right of way. And the reason why I separated these is, you know, there's a lot that goes into the public right of way versus private, and obviously there's two completely different goals. Um, you know, the public right of way, um, primarily in this state, Department of Transportation, but, you know, plan development, property research, acquisition, you know, and then eventually appraisal, you know, because, you know, and I think even on the private side, there is some compensation that goes into this. And so it's important to know, what that land entails and how potentially how valuable it is. Um, other DOT uses, um, involving bridge work, hydraulics, maintenance, land surveying, environmental, and transportation. You know, all involves parcels, and cadastral data. Public safety and, emergency response. You know, you may think this is at, you know, kind of a local scale for kind of pre-op information, but, you know, I can also think of large wildfire events where the county lines are blurred, obviously, and having this information from county to county to county, and quickly having it in one spot, you know, I can see the value in that, and I think many states do, that have this data relatively available, and not, you know, and Forest Service, I'm sure they have all this data ready to go, but like the, um, you know, Montana obviously is one of the most easiest ways to find all this information all in one place. So you can quickly, in your mind, see the complications if these sources are spread out over 15, 16, 20 different sources. Um, Environmental assessment, you know, at least in this state, we have a state, Department of, uh, environmental quality, and they they rely on this information during the permitting review process and evaluation process. There's so much of what goes on, you know, even from building a house to, you know, doing any sort of timber work. You know, there's a lot of environmental, drilling a well. There's a lot of environmental assessment that goes into in the permits, and I certainly don't see that going away. And having this data relatively available is valuable. Um, as I said earlier, real estate. Real estate is probably the number one use of the Montana cadastral. And when something goes down, we're constantly getting emails or phone calls from title companies to real estate agencies, mortgage, insurance. I mean, the list goes on. That directly ties to cadastral, and and their reliance upon this data. So it quickly is very noticeable when something goes down. Land management, local or state, I'm thinking more along the lines of the natural resource and the land trust division management, and these uses of these lands vary from, forest, ag, grazing, commercial. So, having this type of information, um, you know, is much easier on those land managers. Um, Local government, I think this one's pretty self-explanatory. I think we all use this data on a regular basis. And I think many of you on the call are within the local government, maintaining these parcels or closely tied to maintaining. Recreation, I think certain people like it. Others are, this is kind of the dangerous part of sharing or openly sharing the parcel data. The recreation route planning, if you were to think about going for a hike or a float, I think, we're often we do cross over um, county boundary lines in those, they're often blurred in these types of situations. But these hunting and recreation apps, I think, is kind of the sore spot. And I'm not sure how much you deal with it over in Idaho, but I know we certainly deal with it with Onyx. Um, they obviously they use our data, and I think the disclaimer is not always prevalent for those that are using it out in the field. So, but we obviously have a disclaimer, and anyone that calls, that's kind of our protection policy, and that this data is not for surveying and engineering purposes or even legal. Um, that that is clearly outlined in our disclaimer, in that this data is to be used for informational purposes only. But you can quickly see, if you have all this parcel data loaded up on a hunting or a recreation app, where that can be blurred when you're out there thinking that this is federally or um, public property, and it's Joe Smith that owns it, and you're facing the the barrel of a gun, so it's there's definitely some tension there too. So and we're aware of certain issues in Montana where there's some trespassing issues going on, and a lot of it is sometimes caused from these hunting and recreation apps that would call certain areas out as public domain, and they're not. So, or they're in the wrong location. That's very common in our state, is the um, the kind of the skewness or the displacement of some of these parcels. And then one thing I'll mention too is this cadastral data drastically reduces the amount of staff time or paid consultant fees in these complex researches, and so this applies to many of these situations. And having this information all in one place, I think does contribute to those reduced times. And and our study points out, and I'm sure some of you are aware of this, um, some state data, parcel data is not free, or the sources of this data are essentially selling it to to these private individuals. We obviously certainly don't believe in that here in Montana. We feel that that it's public domain and it should be available. But as I listed, especially in that under that recreation, there's some caveats to a lot of this, and having a disclaimer and being able to explain it is important, because it does come at a um, at a risk, obviously, if folks use it in the wrong ways. So I do want to outline this. There is some drawbacks, but there is a ton of potential, a ton of uses that are greatly appreciated and loved in this state. So um, some of the industries that it commonly is used, and like I mentioned, government, law, insurance. My wife actually works for an insurance agency, so they're often quoting or um, for commercial or residential. They use it. They use this site every day, and they're based here in Helena, but they're often doing quotes for neighboring for those that live in neighboring counties. So construction, real estate, as I mentioned earlier, is the number one. Gas, oil and gas, that kind of goes along the lines of um, the right of ways, private right of ways. Engineering and land surveying. I couldn't tell you how many calls we get of from these types of firms, asking questions about the schema of the data, or the cadastral data, the CAMA. Um, Certainly mining and utilities and lumber and timber industries. They all use this type of data, and those are the ones I can think of. I think there's others out there. I think like accounting, health services. There were some weird ones that I didn't think of that came up in this study. But yeah, it's a certainly a multi industry application and uses, and I think the list can only continues to grow each year. So um, that's basically all I have, everyone. I don't know if there's any questions on that. I'm certainly welcome to questions or discussion.
Yeah, anyone who has questions, feel free. I just kind of wanted to give you a little bit more information on Idaho because I'm the one spearheading a lot of this project that we're doing here.
Yeah.
And so here in Idaho, counties are allowed by Idaho state code that they are allowed to sell their parcel data. So we have heard and been working with a lot of counties and just understanding their perspective on that, because that is
Mm-hmm.
something that has been like a great question for all of them who do sell their parcels. We have 44 counties in Idaho, and I've been working with and getting to all of them. I think I've talked to about 20 right now. Um, and right now we have 7 signed on for our statewide layer as of right now, and that gets updated, and I have that automated for those counties. Um, and so we have created a standard that has superseded even prior to me starting here at the state as well. And so essentially our layer is one for the public, and those counties have to sign a data sharing agreement essentially. And so for some information, they don't want it to be shared out there, right? Like some things like mailing address and etc. Right? Some people have wanted me to remove values off of theirs because the way that their CAMA system updates, they don't really get the correct values, and it causes more questions than actually helps them. So different things like that. And then we have another method as well set up through ArcGIS Enterprise for distributed collaborations to share with public agencies. But for me, that was super helpful, like understanding what are your type of use cases? Because I had the opportunity, I went up north this last week and chatted with a bunch of different county mappers and talked with a lot of assessors, and just kind of understanding where they're coming from, right? It really helps me to understand where the counties are. I don't want to just step on people. I want to work with them, not
Yep.
against them, essentially, you know?
Yep. Yeah. There is a process that Montana does that excludes those that don't want to be listed on the cadastral. So you can think of the city judge or the mayor. There is a process that does exclude that information from being viewed or being able to be searchable on the application, but it still would still reside on the back end. So any sort of appraiser, state appraiser, or county officials could still access that data. But yeah, I completely understand a lot of that, and yeah, it's just that's just interesting to me, because I mean we've always just believed in open data, and the state obviously has a lot of uses. Most of those are state uses, or private uses, and so the private industry. As I mentioned earlier, is over 60% of uses of the cadastral application. So, and but it does complicate things if this data isn't readily available in one spot. It greatly increases the time for research and development of these plans, and you certainly can't just do a statewide analysis of pick any of those topics, and so I see both sides of it, and like I mentioned in the opening, if we were to justify this, if we were in your guys' boat, it would be that much more difficult in this day and age, um, when when the interest of selling this data is probably at its highest. But I can also see it too, that it would drastically reduce those individuals that have to take these requests. It would drastically reduce the amount of time that they have to deal with that situation. So that's just more time that they can spend on dealing with planning or public works related issues, and not have to deal with selling the data to the public. So, and I'm not sure if that's a GIS thing. That could be a legal department thing too. But that's just. I used to make maps for the public, my previous jobs. I've dealt with the public before, and now we're kind of on the state side things. We don't really interact with the public as much, in terms of like making a map, printing it for them, like, hey, that's $10 for that map, or $20, So, um, so yeah, I'm welcome to any questions. Certainly chime up.
Go ahead, Barb.
Hi there. Thanks for that presentation. That just gives me a lot to think about. So did I hear you correctly that you guys have a statewide CAMA system? Because I was a little late getting into the meeting. Or is there individual CAMA systems that feed into a database and then you disperse it from there from the revenue department?
Here, let me share my screen. I'll show you our application. Might be helpful in this case.
Now, do you guys work with a vendor for that, or are you guys developing it in-house?
The CAMA.
Yeah.
That's all Department of Revenue. So it's the revenue division for state. They have their own system, just as if the counties are maintaining their own, and then it pulls from the county,
Okay.
I think, on a daily basis. Let me share my screen real fast.
But I do have a company locally that's gonna take care of it tomorrow, if I can get it set up or okay with you guys. And so I'm just calling to see. So I'm just calling to see what I can do to get that done.
Okay, so let me just turn on the aerial here, just so it's.
I think it's under Thomas, so THOMAS.
Just takes a second to
Crowley,
load.
CROWLEY.
Hey Megan, are you able to take care of that
My wife and I are.
call or that noise?
Is that me?
Personal.
Yeah,
Okay.
okay. Sorry about that.
Okay. So kind of related to the question there too. This parcel information, essentially is joined with this CAMA, and so there's a number of different things, in this, and this was established, 20 some years ago of what's included in here, and a lot. The CAMA database is actually kind of messy. This is kind of a cleaner way of pulling this data, but it has a ton of different tables. The actual database does, but this is just a quicker and easier way and cleaner way of displaying it is through this application. So yeah, so like I mentioned, we got dwelling information, other buildings. So you got like garage, looks like some concrete, sometimes shed information is in there, patio. But yeah, and then if this was in a commercial building or ag, this stuff would be populated, and then you see the appraisal, so the stuff that the building value, the land, the total value.
I don't want to go full.
So
Let's just go.
Okay. Is it apple to apple for pretty much every county assessors, or is there some deviation between what you get from different counties?
Yeah.
I'm not
So,
completely involved in that process. I would imagine it probably depends county to county, but most of that information comes straight across, and I'm sure there's some field mapping involved. I know North Dakota is actually a great example. They're just starting to set up their statewide CAMA, and they're going through all these questions like who's got what, and and they have all sorts of sources they're going to need to pull from, most of the counties, but some cities maintain their own tax roll stuff too. So yeah, North Dakota is a really good example because they are starting from the ground up, and they have a statewide parcel layer that they've justified and got the counties on board with.
Yeah, and I hope to have at the next meeting, which will be in July, because I'll be out in June, but talking with Bob, I have a meeting with him tomorrow to see if he would be willing to come talk too, because North Dakota is very similar to Idaho.
Yeah.
And what we're dealing with.
Yeah, and I'm not sure, Megan, if you're part of their working group or not, but they have a CAMA working group right now that a lot of the counties are part of, and I'm a part of it just because having we shared some like the schema information with them, the data dictionary, so it was helpful. I think from having our perspective, like we already have an existing CAMA, what does it entail, so. Certainly could share those resources with you too, but
Yeah, that would be great.
yeah, but I don't know. Does Idaho have any sort of state? I don't know. I guess I don't know the ins and outs of how land is valuated. If it's done just from the local level and that's where it stops, or if there's a state revenue office or not.
Jacob, I don't know if you want to touch on that for the State Tax Commission.
Sure, yeah. Hey, everybody. Yeah, I'm Jacob King. I am the GIS manager here for the State Tax Commission. Doesn't sound like we're anything like the Department of Revenue. The counties value their jurisdictions on their own, and they can share parcel data, not all the time, but I think a lot of times they will for public entities. I actually come from Canyon County over on the west side of Boise, adjacent to Oregon. And I was a parcel mapper there for about a decade, and we sold our parcel data at a cost for a while. We used whatever resources we could to control our data, but there wasn't a lot of sharing going on. We would grab whatever data we could for the control of the parcel data and such. But now that I'm here at the state, I'm seeing a lot of, I don't know, I don't want to say a lack of continuity, but that's probably the best term. So our primary role is to maintain tax code areas and tax district boundaries. So whenever a boundary change occurs, that's when we get involved in the taxing district, be it the city or a fire district. wants to change their boundaries, we receive the documents and update our data accordingly. And then we disseminate that down to the county level where they can apply it to their parcels to make sure that, you know, the taxpayer pays the correct taxes to the correct district. But again, what I'm seeing is like across county lines, there's a lot of discrepancies from one parcel set to the next. And a question that I had for you, Jeff, was does the state ever go out on the ground to verify corners, either through, you know, just some interns or actual surveyors? Is there any of that work going on from the state level?
You're talking about the PLSS corners?
Yeah.
So that a lot of that's from different sources. We're unique where we actually directly work with the BLM when they're Canada SDI. And so they haven't had the GIS staff to even maintain that data. So I've essentially been maintaining it, but mostly for our purposes of adjustments, acquiring that PLSS control. But no, we don't have like a direct way to go out. Hey, we need some better survey control in this area. You know, it's more about, you know, we'll take the data where it is, because I mean, a lot of that data is privatized too and sold at a cost. But there are some willing surveyor companies that they're like, hey, for the benefit of cadastral, they essentially donate that data or provide that data to us to consume in an adjustment. Then works its way down to adjusting the parcels. So it is kind of a greater of the good of the order benefit. So.
And Jacob, I don't know for the state tax commission, how many CAMA systems do we have? Because every county has their own, right? And there's some that are duplicated in some counties, right? Like,
Yeah, there's at least 4 different setups. I think there's the GRM Momentum, there's UAD Web, AS400, which is created by the State Tax Commission, and then I think Ada County has their own. So there's, I think 4, maybe 5 at most. But yeah, and that's obviously, you know, it's fun trying to extract the data out of the different cameras and format them into displaying spatially. Yeah, that's definitely a game that we like to play here.
Yeah. Well, and then unique to probably Montana, but there's property appraisers that the state has. And so they'll actually go out when new construction happens, they'll go out and, you know, essentially take pictures and see what's there. And then obviously they pull information from those appraisal reports, and they're essentially in charge of doing the valuation, the tax evaluations for that, and then that information gets pushed back to the county. So there's a lot of information that kind of goes back and forth. You know, the tax roll portion starts, you know, obviously at the county, gets pushed up to the state, but then the state kind of handles the evaluation part for this state at least. I'm just kind of putting a couple links in the chat. First one's just to that cadastral application. We just redid that this year. I think May 1st is when we kind of did the hard switch over, but we've had it publicly available since like the mid to late March. And then that second link is to the Esri user news letter that we were featured in. Gosh, 13 years ago. It's crazy.
well, awesome. Does anyone else have any questions for Jeff while we have him here?
Well, I tell you, Megan, that changed my attitude. So I'll get my agreement and start running it through my chain. That's awesome. That's one world, one database. That's my dream. You know, one place for one-stop shop. So
That's what I'm trying to help Idaho build.
yeah. And I agree with Jacob on getting control. My surveyors in Idaho County, they love my parcel viewer. That helps them out with their business. They give me as much control as I want. And so it's
That's
just
cool.
figuring out how you guys want to capture and update my public land data set. Yeah. I'll
Yeah,
play.
and
I'm in.
this fits into a conversation that myself, Tina, and Jacob had yesterday about understanding the PLSS and what is that going to take, and for Idaho, since we do
Yeah.
have to work with all the counties, right? But we want to work with you guys. We don't want to trample all over you, right? That's going to defeat the entire purpose.
Yeah.
Collaboration is key.
Yeah. Well, the few $1,000s I get from the vendors, I think this is way more beneficial way to look at it. So, yeah, good job.
Go ahead, John. Thanks, Barb.
So speaking of PLSS, brings a question to my mind. Coming from Illinois, I know our PLSS boundaries were, or corners, I guess I should say corners, were questionable. The accuracy was questionable. What is the situation in Idaho? Are they pretty accurate? Are they? I don't know. I haven't investigated it here. Can anyone speak to that?
I'm like Robin, Jacob, Tina.
Well, I know in my county, I started with what came from the BLM, and it's pretty much a perfect model. So there's not a lot of found information in that. So yeah, it's just kind of like if it was perfectly laid out.
We started from the BLM model also, but then modified it to make it work with what we need. So our parcel fabric includes also our ownership and our land activities, but we've updated what we have with surveys that have been done. So we've incorporated also county surveys that we've been able to get into and surveys that we've done on our own property.
Okay.
That's
So
for Department of Lands.
it sounds like there could be some variation across the state in the accuracy of that stuff.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah,
But
I
it's
know that's
improving, it sounds like.
yeah, I know that's the case in Montana as well. I have up on the screen here probably one of the worst areas in Montana that actually has population. We have some areas that are worse that are forested. And we actually have a grant that's going to correct this probably within the next year or so. But yeah, you can directly see the skew.
That
Just to
looks
kind of,
pretty egregious. Yeah.
yeah.
I assume big. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So we're talking, well over 300 feet here. So, but you can see in this as well that the framework of the PLSS and the parcels are aligned with one another. So when you adjust the PLSS, kind of in turn you adjust the parcels, and sometimes in your urban areas you kind of have to go a bit further than that, just because of the legacy of how these towns were originally mapped. But typically, an adjustment will clean a good area like this up, a good mapped area.
Are there any parallel federal efforts to clean up that data and kind of hack it down a little tighter?
Not to my knowledge in Montana. The funding's pretty limited in the GLO office to resurvey areas, and those surveys that do get done and recorded, they are very expensive. So that's typically why you don't see as many federal surveys as you did in the past. A lot of this is done on the local level, and then it's just up to the individuals or the funding sources if it gets pushed up to the state or not, or over to your counties to update theirs. And so there's a lot of privatization of land survey corners too. So, and you kind of have a mixed bag of surveying and engineering firms that are willing to share that information, and then you don't. So we're kind of talking kind of the same apples and oranges here, kind of alignment with the same thing. It's just, I mean, do you value your data or not? And like obviously we have a price tag of free on it, and it's open to the public, and any sort of contributions we get to that data set, we're certainly welcome and open to it. So, but it directly updates the data, though. So that's how I see the benefit of it, of these firms serving, sharing their PLSS corners.
Okay. Thank you.
Anyone else have anything in the last couple minutes?
Good questions, though. I appreciate this. I knew my presentation wasn't going to go very long, so I appreciate the questions.
Well, I don't see we have any questions, but thank you so much, Jeff, for taking the time out of your day to come talk with us. I really, really appreciate it. Even though Montana and Idaho are a little bit different, it really does help to help others understand, what this is going to look like, right? Even if it's on a different, how we're aggregating the data is going to be a little bit different, and kind of the hurdles we have to cross over are a little bit different. But seriously, thank you so much, and everyone at the Montana State Library. I greatly appreciate it.
Yeah, I'm curious of how it all turns out. I've kind of been watching Idaho and North Dakota kind of at the same time, and we're we have vested interest in this as well. We want to see you all succeed too, and taking it from probably a different perspective or a different angle. But we see the common benefit of having this all in one shop. So.
Awesome. Yep, more to come for that, and I'm gonna be working on a hub site probably for parcels specifically, so everyone can see the progress that's being made. So
Cool. Yeah, that'd be cool.
Yeah.
That dashboard that North Dakota initially put out, that was kind of cool of tracking the progress of it. So you kind of see it in real time.
I made one as well, and I'm like, I'm not ready yet. It doesn't look good yet. So yeah. Well, thank you guys. Thanks everyone, and especially thanks Jeff. So I greatly appreciate all of your time, and I'll see you in July. So have a good one, everyone.
Thanks, Megan.
Have a good holiday too.
Thanks, you too. Oh yeah, it's a holiday
Memorial.
weekend.
Yep. Yep. 3-day weekend.
I'm like a workaholic.
Yeah, that's true. So.